Did it really happen? Or were the stories of the Sultan's harem nothing more than fantasy? For centuries, the West was obsessed with this forbidden place. They imagined silk cushions, jeweled women, golden lanterns glowing in the night, a paradise of endless desire. Travelers wrote of music drifting through perfumed air, of laughter hidden behind carved screens. Painters filled their canvases with women reclining in luxury, waiting for a sultan who ruled their lives. But the truth was far more complicated, and perhaps far darker. The word harem itself means forbidden. Every home in the Ottoman world had one, a private place for women and children. But the Sultan's harem was something else entirely. A world within a world. A kingdom built on silence. Behind the walls of Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, the harem stretched like a city of shadows. Latticed windows kept every eye hidden. Heavy doors closed with finality. And within, hundreds of women lived lives that outsiders could only imagine. Some believed they were chosen for greatness. Others knew they were prisoners from the very beginning. All of them were bound by rules that could never be broken. They came from everywhere. Circassian girls taken from the Caucasus, Greeks from the Mediterranean, Slavs, Persians, Africans, brought through the slave markets of Istanbul. Some captured in war, some sold by desperate families, some stolen as children, never to return home again. Their pasts were erased, their names often changed, their future uncertain, and their present controlled. Imagine waiting day after day, year after year, for a man you might never see. Many women in the Sultan's harem never once laid eyes on him. They dressed, they trained, they waited, for nothing. Some lived their entire lives inside those walls, never chosen, never touched, never even spoken to by the ruler they were told to serve. They died waiting, unseen, unheard. For the world outside, the harem was paradise. But for many inside, it was a silent grave. And silence did not mean peace. Every woman was a rival. Every glance could be a threat. Every whisper could carry betrayal. Stories survive of women poisoned by jealous enemies, of favorites suddenly disgraced, of quiet exiles to distant chambers, where no one ever returned. The harem was a battlefield, but no swords were drawn. The weapons were words, alliances, careful smiles, and hidden daggers. To rise meant power, wealth, influence beyond imagination. A single favorite could whisper in the Sultan's ear and change the destiny of an empire. But to fall meant disgrace, oblivion, or death. And beauty was never enough. Cunning mattered, silence mattered, loyalty, at least the appearance of it, mattered most of all. The rules were strict. No man could enter the harem, except for the eunuchs. No woman could leave without permission. Love, if it existed, belonged only to the Sultan. Any other desire was forbidden. Yet still, there were whispers of forbidden passion, of women who risked everything for secret love. Some vanished without a trace. Others were executed. A few attempted escape. Most failed, and paid with their lives. The harem was not only a place of desire. It was a prison of rules, a maze of silence, and a theater of fear. But who enforced this silence? Who held the keys to the forbidden world? The answer was the eunuchs, the black-robed guardians of the harem. They were the only men allowed inside, yet they were not truly men, taken as boys from faraway lands, broken in body so they could never tempt, nor be tempted. Their sacrifice gave them power, and their power shaped the destiny of hundreds. At the top stood the chief black eunuch. He held the keys to every chamber. He knew every secret. He decided which woman would rise, and which would vanish. To the Sultan, he was a trusted servant. To the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, he was an indispensable ally. And to the women inside, he was both protector and executioner. The chief black eunuch's gaze could grant opportunity, or seal a woman's fate forever. With a word, he could open the path to the Sultan's favor. With silence, he could bury someone in darkness. This strange hierarchy gave the harem its shape. Women competing for survival, eunuchs holding the power of life and death, and above them all, unseen yet ever present, the Sultan and his mother. The West imagined it as a paradise, but inside, it was survival. It was fear. It was silence. They called it the Sultan's harem. They called it paradise. But for many, it was a prison dressed in gold. They called it paradise. But inside, it was survival. Every woman entered with hope. Hope to be seen. Hope to be chosen. Hope to rise above the rest. But hope could be dangerous. Because for every woman who rose, 10 others fell. Imagine being surrounded by rivals every day. Every word you spoke could be twisted. Every gesture could be misread. Every smile could hide a knife. In the harem, trust was a luxury. And luxury was rare. Stories survive of jealous rivals poisoning each other's food, of women whispering lies that destroyed reputations overnight, of sudden banishments to distant chambers where no one ever returned. Power was fleeting. One day you might sleep in silk, the next, in silence. The greatest dream was to become the Sultan's favorite, the Haseki Sultan. She held not only his affection but also his ear. Her words could influence the empire. Her presence could shift the balance of power. But with power came danger. To be the favorite was to walk on a blade's edge. One mistake, one rival's whisper, one shift in the Sultan's mood, and it could all be lost. Some women became legends, mothers of future rulers, queens behind the curtain. But for every legend, there were countless forgotten. Girls who waited for years and died without a name. Women who were never remembered, their faces fading into the shadows of history. And then there was the unseen hand. The Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother. Her authority shaped the harem more than anyone else. She decided who was favored. She controlled the rivalries. She turned ambition into survival. And sometimes, survival into ruin. Beside her stood the eunuchs. Their black robes whispered through the corridors. They were everywhere. Watching. Listening. Waiting. Their loyalty was to the Sultan, yes. But often, their true alliance lay with the Valide. Together they controlled the rhythm of life inside. Together they decided who would rise, and who would disappear. The chief black eunuch held immense power. He guarded the Sultan's secrets. He carried the messages that could change lives. He could open the door to the Sultan's chamber, or keep it closed forever. Imagine knowing your fate depended on a single glance. A single word spoken by a man in shadows. A man who had no family, no desire, no future of his own, yet held the futures of hundreds in his hands. And so the women of the harem lived in constant tension. Every day was a performance. Every gesture calculated. Every look rehearsed. Because one slip could mean exile, or worse. Was it truly a paradise? Could a place filled with silk and gold still be a prison? Was it desire, or despair? We may never know the full truth. The walls of Topkapi Palace never spoke. The women inside were silenced. Their voices erased. Their stories forbidden. But fragments remain. And in those fragments we glimpse the shadows of reality. A world where hundreds of women lived and died unseen. A world where survival meant betrayal. Where beauty was a weapon. And silence, the sharpest blade of all. The Sultan's harem has been remembered as a place of mystery. Romanticized in paintings. Fantasized in stories. But strip away the illusions, and the truth is far darker. It was not only a house of desire. It was a stage of power. A prison of silence. A battlefield of whispers. And though centuries have passed, one question lingers in the air. Did it really happen this way? Or was it all just a dream? Inside the harem, survival was never guaranteed. Every woman arrived with hope. Hope to be chosen. Hope to rise. Hope to escape the shadows of silence. But hope could be dangerous. Because for every woman who rose, many more fell. The harem was not only about beauty. It was about power. It was about survival. And it was about secrets. Behind the silken curtains, whispers spread faster than fire. A single rumor could destroy a life. A careless word could mean exile. A jealous glance could turn into poison in a cup. Women fought battles without swords. They fought with whispers. With alliances. With lies carefully planted in the right ears. Trust was rare. Friendship was fragile. And betrayal was everywhere. The dream of every concubine was to catch the Sultan's eye. To become his favorite. To be lifted from the shadows into the light. The title of Haseki Sultan brought unimaginable wealth and power. But it also brought enemies. Because the higher a woman rose, the more knives waited for her in the dark. Stories survive of favorites who ruled with influence one day, and the next, vanished. Banished to distant chambers. Silenced forever. Sometimes poisoned by rivals. Sometimes destroyed by a single whisper in the Sultan's ear. And still, the struggle continued. Every smile was calculated. Every word rehearsed. Every movement measured. Because in the harem, appearance was survival. Forbidden love was the greatest crime of all. Every woman belonged only to the Sultan. Her heart, her body, her loyalty. But desire could not always be contained. And when love bloomed in secret, the punishment was merciless. There are tales of women who risked everything for forbidden passion. Some were caught. Some simply disappeared. Some were drowned in the Bosphorus, their bodies swept away in silence. To break the rules of the harem was to challenge the empire itself. And no empire forgives betrayal. Even escape was nearly impossible. The walls were high. The guards unyielding. The eunuchs watched every movement, every word, every shadow. Few tried to flee. Fewer still survived the attempt. The harem was not a paradise. It was a prison woven in silk. A stage where ambition and fear danced hand in hand. Every woman was both victim and player in a dangerous game. Some learned to master it. Others were swallowed by it. Above them all stood the Valide Sultan. The mother of the Sultan. Her influence reached into every corner. She decided who was favored. She managed the rivalries. Her word could raise a girl from obscurity, or cast her into ruin. And by her side, always, stood the eunuchs. Watching, listening, judging. This silent empire thrived on fear, on ambition, on secrecy. It was a place where beauty could open doors, but betrayal always lurked behind them. The West imagined music, passion, and endless pleasure. But the truth inside was whispers of poison. The truth was rivalries fought in silence. The truth was women waiting in fear, wondering if tomorrow would bring favor or death. And so the harem remained a mystery. A place where lives were decided in shadows. A place where love was forbidden. Where hope was dangerous. Where silence was survival. Did it truly happen this way? Were these stories real, or shaped by fear and imagination? The walls of the harem will never tell. The women are long gone. Their voices silenced forever. But the fragments we hold reveal enough. Enough to see that behind the silken curtains, paradise was an illusion. And the truth was far darker. They were men, and yet not men. They were the only ones allowed to walk freely inside the harem. And they carried more power than most could ever imagine. The eunuchs. Their black robes whispered through the corridors of Topkapi. Their eyes missed nothing. They watched every step. They listened to every word. And in silence, they judged. Most had been taken as boys. Stolen from distant lands. From Africa. From the Middle East. From beyond the empire's borders. They were brought in chains. Their bodies mutilated. Their future stolen. All so they could serve in a world where no other man could enter. It was a cruel fate. But from cruelty came power. The harem trusted them because it had no choice. They were guardians. They were gatekeepers. They held the keys to every locked chamber. And they carried secrets that could never be spoken aloud. At the top of this strange hierarchy stood the chief black eunuch. His title was more than ceremonial. He commanded the entire harem. He controlled access to the Sultan himself. And in many ways, he decided who would rise, and who would fall. To the women, his favor meant everything. If he smiled, doors opened. If he frowned, doors closed. If he turned away, lives ended in silence. Imagine living with the knowledge that your future rested in the hands of a man who had no family of his own. No children. No legacy. No desire. And yet, with a single word, he could destroy you. The chief eunuch was also the bridge between the harem and the Sultan's mother, the Valide Sultan. Together they ruled the inner palace. Together they controlled every whisper. Together they shaped the empire from behind curtains. Many feared the eunuchs. Some despised them. But all obeyed them. Because to defy them was to defy the Sultan himself. And no one survived that. But power is never without danger. The eunuchs were not only servants. They were players in their own game. They carried messages between rivals. They accepted bribes. They chose sides in secret wars. And sometimes, they decided the outcome before it even began. Their presence was constant. Their silence was heavy. And their shadows stretched across every chamber. For the women of the harem, the eunuchs were both protectors and jailers. They guarded the gates from intruders. But they also locked the women inside. They promised safety. But they also delivered punishment. Some eunuchs were remembered for loyalty. Others for cruelty. All of them for power. And still, their own lives were marked by tragedy. They had been robbed of choice. Robbed of future. Robbed of humanity. And yet, through this sacrifice, they became some of the most powerful men in the empire. It is easy to imagine the harem as ruled only by beauty. But in truth, the black-robed eunuchs were the invisible hand. They decided which woman would be seen by the sultan. They decided which rival would be silenced. They carried every secret. They controlled every moment. And though centuries have passed, one fact remains. Without the eunuchs, the harem could not exist. They were its shadow, its heartbeat, its guardians of silence. Did they enjoy this power? Did they hate the role forced upon them? Were they loyal, or were they plotting their own revenge against a world that had mutilated them? We may never know. But their presence shaped history, and their silence held more weight than any sword. They all dreamed of it, to be chosen, to be seen, to be lifted from the shadows into the light of the sultan's gaze. But in the harem, dreams were dangerous, and the highest dream of all was to become the sultan's favorite. The title of Haseki Sultan was more than honor. It was power. It was survival. It was the difference between obscurity and immortality. For the hundreds of women confined within the palace, the path to this title was narrow, and it was filled with rivals who would do anything to block the way. Every glance mattered. Every word carried weight. Every gesture could mean the difference between rising or falling. Some women spent years training, perfecting their speech, learning music, studying poetry, mastering the arts of charm and grace, because one day, one moment, the sultan might look their way. And if he did, everything changed. The chosen woman was showered with gifts, silks, jewels, servants of her own, her chamber filled with luxuries that others could only dream of. But more than wealth, she gained influence. She gained a voice. She gained the power to whisper into the ear of the most powerful man in the empire. And with that whisper, she could change history. Yet this rise came with peril. The higher a woman climbed, the more enemies gathered below her. Jealousy burned in every glance. Rivalry sharpened in every smile. Every woman who dreamed of the same title now dreamed also of her downfall. Poison was slipped into cups. Rumors were spread in silence. Allies turned into traitors overnight. Because in the harem, there was no middle ground. You were rising, or you were falling. History remembers some of these favorites. Their names survived the silence of time. Harem Sultan, once a slave girl from distant lands, rose to become not only the sultan's wife, but one of the most powerful figures in the empire. She shaped politics. She influenced wars. She left her mark not only on the palace, but on history itself. But for every harem, there were countless forgotten. Women who caught the sultan's eye for a night, and were cast aside forever. Women who were promised greatness, but met only silence. Women who gambled everything, and lost. To be the favorite was to walk on a blade. One slip, one whisper, one wrong move, and the fall was deadly. Because the sultan's affection was never guaranteed. One day it burned bright. The next, it was gone. And when it was gone, so was your safety. The Valide Sultan watched carefully. The mother of the sultan never allowed a favorite to gain power unchecked. She decided how far a woman could rise. She balanced the rivalries. She cut down those who threatened her influence. And beside her, always, stood the eunuchs. They carried messages. They judged intentions. They warned of betrayal. They were the eyes and ears of the Valide. And with a single word, they could seal a woman's fate. To be a favorite meant to fight on all sides. To please the sultan. To gain the approval of the Valide. To survive the envy of rivals. to protect yourself from whispers in the dark. It was a crown, but it was made of glass, brilliant to look upon, fragile to the touch, and always at risk of shattering. The favorites walked the palace like queens, but at night, they slept with fear. Fear of poison in their food, fear of exile, fear that tomorrow, another woman would take their place. And yet, still, women fought for it, because the reward was too great, because the dream of power burned brighter than the fear of death. The rise of the favorites reshaped the empire itself. Behind the curtains of the harem, decisions were made that touched the battlefield, the treasury, even the throne. Wars were influenced, alliances shifted, policies changed, all because of whispers in the Sultan's ear. It was said that sometimes, the fate of nations rested not in the council chambers, but in the silken chambers of the harem. And so, to be the favorite was more than survival. It was destiny. It was history. But for every woman who rose to that height, dozens were buried in silence. Their names forgotten. Their faces lost. Their hopes erased. The harem promised paradise. But paradise was never free. It demanded sacrifice. It demanded cunning. It demanded silence. And at the center of it all stood the favorites. Women who rose above the rest. Women who dared to dream. Women who gained everything, and risked everything. Some triumphed. Some perished. All were remembered, or forgotten, by the shifting wool of power. The rise of the favorites was not a story of love. It was a story of survival. A story of ambition. A story of women who fought in silence, and sometimes won the empire itself. Did it really happen exactly this way? Were these women truly as powerful as the whispers claim? Or has history painted them brighter than they were? We may never know. But what remains is enough to remind us that behind the silken curtains, paradise was an illusion, and power was the most dangerous desire of all. She was not one of the concubines. She was not a rival in the shadows. She was something far greater. The Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, the true power behind the walls of the harem. While the outside world imagined the Sultan as the sole master of his empire, inside the palace, it was often his mother who pulled the strings. Her chambers stood at the very heart of the harem. They were larger, richer, more guarded than any other. Silk cushions, carved wood, golden lamps that burned through the night. But her greatest possession was not wealth. It was authority. Every woman in the harem bowed to her will. Every eunuch served her command. Every whisper was measured against her judgment. For the Valide Sultan, the harem was not a prison. It was a throne, a place from which she ruled in silence. She decided who rose, and who fell. She chose which concubines would be presented to her son. She determined who might bear his children. She controlled the rivalries before they grew too dangerous. And when danger came, she removed it. To defy her was unthinkable. To displease her was fatal. Imagine being a young girl in the harem, beautiful, ambitious, dreaming of greatness, and then, finding your fate in the hands of a woman you could never rival. The Sultan's mother was untouchable. Her word was law. Her will was final. Some of these mothers came from the same beginnings as the concubines themselves, brought as slaves, rising to become favorites, bearing the Sultan a son, and when that son ascended the throne, they rose higher than anyone else. From obscurity to majesty, from silence to dominance, from prisoner to queen, the Valide Sultan commanded not only the harem, but often the empire itself. Ministers bowed before her. Eunuchs carried her orders. Her influence reached far beyond the palace walls. She decided alliances. She advised on wars. She shaped the fate of nations. But her greatest weapon was not her wealth, nor her armies. It was her son. Through him, she commanded everything. Through him, she bent the empire to her will. And yet, her rule was not without danger. Because as powerful as she was, she lived in a world of constant intrigue. Every concubine in the harem dreamed not only of the Sultan's favor, but of bearing the next ruler. Every rival dreamed of replacing her. Every whisper carried the threat of rebellion. The Valide Sultan had to be sharper than anyone else, more cunning, more ruthless, more patient. She used the eunuchs as her eyes and ears. They reported every rumor, every secret meeting, every hint of betrayal, and she acted swiftly. Some concubines were banished, others poisoned, others simply disappeared. Her power was absolute, her reach unstoppable. And yet, she, too, was once vulnerable. She, too, once waited in silence. She, too, once feared the same prison that now obeyed her. That was her strength. She understood the game, because she had played it, and she had won. The West imagined the Sultan as the center of the harem, but in truth, the Valide was the heart. Her presence shaped every moment. Her judgment decided every fate. Her shadow loomed over every chamber. Without her, the harem would collapse into chaos. With her, it became an empire within the empire. History remembers some of these women. Qasem Sultan, Turhan Sultan, mothers who ruled in their own right, women who held more power than generals and viziers, women who guided the course of the Ottoman Empire itself. But for every name remembered, many more were lost. Silent rulers, mothers whose influence shaped lives but never reached the pages of history, their stories buried in silence. And so the harem was never just about desire. It was about politics. It was about power. And at its center stood the Valide Sultan, the mother of the ruler, the mother of power. She was not a shadow. She was the light that cast the shadows. She was not a prisoner. She was the queen behind the curtain. And yet, even she was not eternal. Her power lasted only as long as her son's. When he died, her reign ended. When another son took the throne, another mother rose. And the cycle began again. This was the nature of the harem, a world of shifting power. A stage where every woman's fate was tied to the sultan, and where the sultan's mother ruled until her time was gone. The Valide Sultan was the most feared, the most respected, the most powerful woman in the empire. But even her story was written in silence, because the walls of the harem never spoke, and history never fully recorded the whispers of its queens. Did it really happen exactly this way? Were these women truly the hidden rulers of an empire? Or have the stories been shaped by myth, by fear, by imagination? The truth lies somewhere in between, but one thing remains clear. Behind the silken curtains of the harem, paradise was an illusion, and power belonged to the mother of the sultan. Every empire rises, and every empire falls. The harem was no different. Once a world of whispers and shadows, of silken power and hidden queens, it, too, began to fade. The decline of the Ottoman Empire carried with it the decline of its most forbidden world. As the empire weakened, the walls of the palace seemed less eternal. The whispers inside grew quieter. The rivalries mattered less. The harem, once the beating heart of intrigue, became only an echo. But its fall was not sudden. It came slowly, piece by piece, year by year. The harem had always been a place of secrets, a place where silence was survival. But with time, silence turned into emptiness. The golden days of influence were gone. The mothers of sultans, once the most powerful women in the empire, saw their roles diminish. Favorites no longer shaped wars and policies. Eunuchs no longer held the keys to an empire's fate. The outside world was changing. Europe was rising. Wars drained the empire's strength. And within the palace, the harem, once feared and envied, was slowly forgotten. The women still lived there. They still dressed in silk. They still waited in silence. But their voices no longer mattered. Their lives no longer changed the empire. They were prisoners in a gilded cage that had lost its purpose. Some concubines lived their entire lives within those walls, long after their power had faded. They died in obscurity, unseen, unheard, their graves marked only by silence. The eunuchs, too, lost their authority. Once they were the shadows behind the throne. Now they were relics of a system the world no longer feared. The chief black eunuch, once one of the most powerful figures in the empire, became a symbol of a fading past. The Valide Sultan, the mother of the ruler, no longer commanded the same reverence. Her voice still carried weight within the walls of the palace, but beyond them, her influence was vanishing. The empire was crumbling. And with it, the harem's hold on destiny dissolved. Imagine walking through those halls in the final days. The same corridors where queens once plotted. The same chambers where favorites once dreamed. Now quiet. Now empty. The whispers gone. The power gone. Only echoes remained. When the Ottoman Empire finally collapsed in the early 20th century, the harem collapsed with it. Its gates were opened. Its chambers abandoned. The women were released, or simply faded away into the streets of a changing world. The silence that once protected the harem became permanent. The stories were never written. The voices never recorded. And so history was left with fragments. Today, visitors walk through the remains of the harem in Topkapi Palace. They see the tiled walls, the carved wood, the empty chambers. They see beauty. They see art. But what they do not see are the lives that once filled those rooms. The laughter, the tears, the betrayals, the hopes, the fears. All of it lost, all of it silenced. Was it truly paradise? Or was it a prison? Were the women powerful queens who shaped history, or forgotten captives who never escaped the walls? The truth is both. The truth is neither. The truth lies hidden between silence and shadow. What remains is mystery. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of the harem, not what we know, but what we will never know. The empire is gone. The Sultan's throne is gone. The eunuchs are gone. The women are gone. Only questions remain. Did it really happen this way? Were the stories of power and betrayal true? Or were they fantasies, shaped by imagination, painted by outsiders, distorted by time? We may never know. But we know this. Behind the silken curtains of the Sultan's forbidden harem, lives were lived. Lives of hope. Lives of fear. Lives of power and silence. And though the empire has fallen, though the harem is forgotten, though the voices are lost, their shadows remain. Echoes in empty halls. Whispers carved into stone. Reminders that paradise was never truly paradise. It was an illusion. And illusions always fade.